In this session, we want to talk about our adult class outreach leaders. We want to talk about their responsibility. We want to talk about their ministry within the context of that Sunday school class. I want to say, first of all, that it's absolutely imperative that every class have an outreach leader. It's absolutely imperative. Let me tell you why. Because it makes a statement about what's important. For instance, let me tell you some things that are important here at Woodstock. Can I? Preaching's important here at Woodstock. You know how I know that? We have someone that's designated with the specific responsibility to intentionally study, prepare, and present messages when we come here to worship the Lord. I'll tell you what else is important here. Bible study's important here. How do I know Bible study's important? Because we have Sunday school teachers who have the specific intentional responsibility to study a lesson and then present it on Sunday morning so that we can grow our people and they can learn the Bible. I'll tell you what else is important here. Choir practice is important here. How do I know that? Because someone has the specific intentional responsibility to make sure that choir practice takes place and it's prepared and it's run appropriately. I'll tell you what else is important here. Taking the offering is important here. How do I know that? Because we have people every Sunday morning with the specific intentional responsibility to pass the offering plates to us so that we can give our tithes and offerings. You see, the reason that you have people that own task is because those tasks are important. Now, if a class doesn't have someone that is an outreach leader, that doesn't mean that it's not important. It does mean that it probably will become unimportant because nobody's manning the outreach ship. Now, we wouldn't think about showing up on Sunday morning and going to Sunday school and just hoping somebody had a lesson. No, we show up knowing somebody's designated with that responsibility. The same's true with preaching. The same's true with taking offering. The same's true with all these other things. And so if we don't have someone that's manning the outreach ship, I want to say outreach will eventually become out of sight and out of mind. And we probably won't get it done. We must have someone that's responsible for outreach in every adult Sunday school class, and especially considering the responsibility of that outreach leader, not only for our Woodstock outreach, but for our whole Acts 1:8 around the world outreach that we'll talk about in just a moment. So, with that being the backdrop, let me just talk to you a minute about our outreach leaders and what we would call their ministry description, okay? Several things on that an outreach leader would need to know. First of all, number one, an outreach leader is responsible to lead the class to effectively carry out Acts 1:8. Now, folks, Acts 1:8, we're not obedient to Acts 1:8 when we read it and believe it. It's when we read it, believe it, and do it. That's when we really become an Acts 1:8 Sunday school. You see, I believe when Jesus gave us the Great Commission, he cast the vision that we're to reach the world with the gospel. But when he gave us Acts 1:8, he actually gave us a strategy whereby we could go about accomplishing it. And that's the reason I think that we're specifically, intentionally, purposefully supposed to find a way to be involved in our Jerusalem and then in some Judea, some Samaria, some uttermost part of the earth, because that is the command of Christ in Acts 1:8. And the outreach leader's job is to lead the class to do that. We came close to changing the title of our outreach leader a couple of years ago. I decided not to do it because I felt like it would be too confusing, and we're already bought into this name of outreach leader. But we come real close to calling our outreach leaders the Acts 1:8 strategist. I really like that. It's just I thought it would confuse things, and so we kept it as the outreach leader. The second thing on the ministry description, if you will, is that the outreach leader must participate in our church's visitation outreach program every week. Now you say, Allan, why do they need to do it every week? For the same reason a teacher needs to teach every week. How can you be the teacher if you're not the one teaching? How are you going to lead the class to do outreach if you're not doing it? Now, I know you're going to take vacation and that kind of thing, but you understand what I'm saying. It's got to be the regular pattern of our outreach leaders to be here when we do our outreach visitation to lead the class in those endeavors. Number three, the outreach leader needs to be trained in an evangelism strategy of some sort. That is, we want to make sure the outreach leader can present the gospel to someone and even help the class members to be able to present the gospel. And so they must be trained in some type of evangelism strategy, and I'm not here to dictate which particular one that is, but they need to have some kind of training for that. Number four, our outreach leaders need to train class members in sharing their faith And I think the best way to do it is to take them visiting with you. Actually, model it before them. Let them watch you as you present the gospel. Now, we can take them in a classroom, and we do and will, to teach them how to share their faith, how to share a gospel presentation. But I still say the best training you'll ever get is to go with someone and watch them and let them model it for you, and then you teach them by your very example. They get really hands-on, practical teaching in the context of sitting in a living room with someone and talking to them about Christ. And so we want to encourage our outreach leaders to take people with you. Number 5, that is, the outreach leader should keep the class prospect book updated and current. Now, I'm going to tell you, the prospect book to an outreach leader ought to be the same as the teacher's quarterly is to a teacher. It's a great guide for you. And in fact, the outreach leader needs to keep up with that, because folks, understand something. If you don't have a name, address, and phone number, you don't have a prospect. Now, there's a lot of lost people out there. But if you don't know a name, address, and phone number, you don't have a prospect. I got to tell you this story. 2 guys were sitting down to eat one night. One was hungry and one wasn't. One guy, the guy that was hungry, he gobbles up his plate, and he's throwing down. The guy that wasn't hungry, he just eats a couple of bites and plays around with his food. And finally, the guy that was hungry looked at him after he'd finished his plate, and he said, "Are you not going to eat that?" And he said, "I'm not very hungry tonight. I'm not going to eat it." He said, "Man, don't you know that there's people in India starving to death?" And the guy looked back at him, and he said, "Name one." Now, you see, we say all the time, there's people out there without Christ. They're dying and they're perishing without Jesus. Name one. Because if you can't, you're probably not going to reach him. You've got to have a name, address, and a phone number, and that's the reason that prospect book is vital, that someone keep up with it, because when you don't keep up with it, we just lose whatever prospects are in there. We just lost them. And so it's important that you keep up with the prospect book. Number 6, attend the monthly Sunday school leadership meetings. We want our outreach leaders here because we say that reaching people is the number 1 priority of Sunday school. And if that's the case, then the people leading that charge ought to be here to help us with our planning and our direction and the mission of accomplishing that through Sunday school. Number 7, attend the monthly class planning meetings with the class leadership team. When that team of leaders in that class, the teacher and the care group leader, the outreach leaders, and other positions you may have as secretaries or fellowship leaders, whatever, when they get together to plan, the outreach leader needs to be a big part of that. Again, he's leading the reaching people aspect of our Sunday school. He needs to be a part of that and have his input. Number 8, I really like this one. The outreach leader needs to arrive early and serve as the class greeter on Sunday mornings. That is, he ought to be there or she ought to be there at the door, and when people come in, put out a hand of fellowship, put out a smile, greet the folks when they come in. You say, "Allan, why do you want a greeter to do that?" Because when the visitors come in, the first person they ought to meet is the class outreach leader. Because that outreach leader should be knocking on their door that week. And if they've met the outreach leader when they first come in all likelihood they'll remember who that person is, since it's the first person they meet. And therefore, when they knock on the door, they will remember them and let them come in. But if they're just another face in the crowd around here, they knock on the door, they may not let them in. And so the outreach leader ought to serve as the class greeter on Sunday mornings, and those that's on visitation teams ought to help the outreach leader do that. And that way you can make a contact that'll, I hope, get you through the door when you want to go share with them throughout the week. Number 9, our outreach leaders need to lead the class's 1-8 mission endeavors and partnerships in Woodstock and around the world. I've already spoke to that, but basically our outreach leaders help us with our own Jerusalem mission, and then they help every class find that strategic mission partnership, their SMP, and help lead the charge there as well, wherever that may be and wherever you feel the Lord's led your class to make that kind of a partnership in another part of the world. Number 10, lead the Sunday morning 10-minute outreach emphasis. We've asked every class to give 10 minutes every morning to the outreach leader. And the reason we want to do that, remember, we're trying to make a schedule on Sunday morning that task number 1, reaching people, gets some air time. And so we're asking that the outreach leader have 10 minutes every week. That's the reason we asked that the care group leaders get 20 minutes every week, so they get some air time to minister to people. And that's the reason we say the teacher ought to get 30 minutes every week to have some air time to teach the people. Therefore, reach people, teach people, minister to people. All three are active every Sunday morning in every class. It's before every class every week. Now, here's how we've asked our outreach leaders to use the 10 minutes. We've asked them to do it on the first and third Sundays of the month, to take the prospect book into the class and distribute the prospects so that people can make contact with